In the golden haze of 1,940 seconds, Britain, one name shimmered brighter than all the rest, Margaret Lockwood. Her eyes, dark as midnight velvet, could command a room, and her voice, low and deliberate, carried the power to both seduce and destroy. On screens across the nation, she was the Wicked Lady. The Lady Vanishes, the face of British cinema's golden age. And then, she was gone. No scandal on the front pages, no farewell performance, just silence. It was as if the screen itself had swallowed her whole. What could make a woman at the height of her fame simply disappear? Was it pride, principle, or something the world was never meant to see? They said she turned her back on Hollywood. They said she refused a role too immoral for her own soul. But those who truly knew her whispered of something else, a choice that blurred the line between integrity and exile. This is not the story of how Margaret Lockwood rose to stardom. It's the story of how she vanished. Margaret Lockwood was born in Karachi in 1916, back when the British Empire still ruled the map in red. By the time she reached London as a young woman, the world was trembling on the edge of war, and the film industry was desperate for faces that could make people forget the fear outside. She became that face. Her breakout came with Alfred Hitchcock's The Lady Vanishes, 1938. A clever thriller that not only turned her into a household name but also defined a new kind of heroine, intelligent, daring, and disarmingly human. Through the 1,940 seconds, she dominated the British box office with The Man in Grey and The Wicked Lady, portraying women who were as morally complex as they were unforgettable. Lockwood wasn't just Britain's favorite actress. She was British cinema. Her smile on posters filled every theater window. Her films were events, and her name alone could carry a production to success. But as the war ended and the world began to rebuild, something shifted. Hollywood came calling, offering her global fame, and she refused. Studios began to push for roles that didn't align with her sense of dignity. And quietly, the woman who once lit up every screen began to fade into the shadows of her own legend. Margaret Mary Lockwood didn't step into fame, she grew into it. Born to a family far from the glitter of London, her childhood was marked by movement and longing. When her parents separated, the young girl found solace not in toys, but in stories. She once said, "I never dreamed of being famous, I dreamed of disappearing into other people's lives." That quiet obsession led her to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. At first, directors dismissed her as too soft for serious drama, until a small theater role caught the attention of filmmakers. Her beauty was undeniable, but it was her restraint, the calm under fire, that made her unforgettable. In the late 1,930 seconds, when Alfred Hitchcock was searching for a leading lady who could combine vulnerability and intellect, Lockwood was his choice. The Lady Vanishes became her defining moment, a box office triumph that turned a shy actress into Britain's most beloved woman overnight. She followed it with darker, more daring performances in The Man in Grey and The Wicked Lady, cementing her image as the quintessential femme fatale of the British screen. Audiences adored her. Critics respected her. And for a brief, blazing moment, Margaret Lockwood stood as the embodiment of British cinema's power, elegant, mysterious, and utterly untouchable. Yet behind that brilliance, something in her eyes always hinted at distance, as though she already knew that every spotlight burns out eventually. Fame came quickly, and with it the slow erosion of peace. By the mid-1,940 seconds, Margaret Lockwood couldn't walk through London without drawing crowds. Her every movement was reported, her every smile analyzed. The woman who once dreamed of escaping into stories now found that she had become one. Film studios treated her like a national treasure, but also like property. Schedules were relentless. Publicists dictated what she wore, where she appeared, even how she should smile. Lockwood, fiercely independent, began to push back. "I act for the screen," she once told a reporter, "but I live for myself." Her resistance didn't go unnoticed. When producers offered her a role she considered indecent, one that reduced a complex woman into a caricature of moral corruption, she refused. That single no changed everything. Rumors began to swirl. She was difficult, ungrateful, uncooperative. Offers dwindled. Invitations vanished. The industry that once worshipped her quietly turned away. Meanwhile, her private life reflected the cost of her defiance. Her marriage to Rupert Leon, once strong, began to crumble under the weight of press scrutiny and constant absence. Her devotion to her daughter, Julia, became her only refuge. Behind the elegant facade, Lockwood struggled with a truth. No one wanted to admit that in the world of stardom, a woman's worth was measured not by her talent, but by her obedience. And Margaret Lockwood was no one's obedient star. The silence began, gradually one film canceled, one role recast, one invitation never sent. By the time Margaret Lockwood noticed, she was already fading from the marquee lights she once dominated. The 1,950 seconds arrived with new faces, new voices, new kinds of beauty, and Britain's most luminous star was suddenly too familiar, too proud, too unwilling to bend. She tried to adapt. There were appearances in theater, radio, and television, but none carried the magic that once defined her. Behind closed doors, friends spoke of her growing isolation, her reluctance to attend public events, her increasing distrust of the industry that had built and broken her. Lockwood's private world became smaller, her circle tighter. She read scripts, but few matched her ideals. She rejected offers she found unworthy, and in doing so, built her own quiet exile. Hollywood's calls still came, but she never accepted. "I am British," she reportedly said, "and I belong to my own soil." Some said pride was her downfall. Others said integrity. Perhaps it was both. What no one saw was the quiet ache beneath the surface. The woman who had once carried a nation's dreams now carried only the weight of her own solitude. As the world moved on, Margaret Lockwood slipped into a silence. No headline could capture a silence that felt less like defeat and more like surrender to a truth she'd always known. That fame is not lost. It simply stops calling your name. By the time the 1,970 seconds came, the girl who once ruled Britain's silver screen had become a figure of nostalgia remembered fondly, but rarely seen. Margaret Lockwood had not vanished completely. She simply chose silence over spectacle. She appeared occasionally on stage and in television dramas, but her fame no longer defined her life. Those who met her in later years described her as gracious, distant, and still possessed of that haunting poise that once captivated millions. In her final decades, she withdrew almost entirely from public life. Invitations to reunions or retrospectives went unanswered. She refused interviews, declined tributes, and never explained her retreat. It was as though she had drawn a curtain between herself and the world, a private stage upon which only memory was allowed to perform. There were whispers that she had grown weary of an industry that betrayed its artists, that she had chosen to live quietly for her family, that she had simply tired of pretending. Whatever the reason, she never returned to the spotlight that had once worshipped her. When she passed away in 1990, the news came softly, no front-page headlines, no public farewell. Only quiet obituaries, written with respect tinged by disbelief, for a woman who had once been everything to British cinema. Margaret Lockwood's final act was not a scene, but a gesture, the choice to leave without fanfare, to let silence speak where applause once roared. Decades after her final bow, the shadow of Margaret Lockwood still lingers in the flicker of black and white reels. Her performances, sharp, magnetic, unapologetically human, continue to haunt film enthusiasts and historians alike. The Lady Vanishes remains a masterclass in subtlety. The Wicked Lady, a symbol of post-war rebellion wrapped in satin and scandal. You can see her influence in every actress who dares to play a woman both dangerous and dignified, complex, not convenient. She taught audiences that a heroine could be flawed, and that flaw could make her unforgettable. Even today, when her name appears on the silver screen, there's a quiet electricity, the sense that you're watching someone who understood fame's illusion better than most. She didn't chase immortality. She defined it by walking away. Critics who revisit her work often note how modern she feels, her restraint, her intelligence, her refusal to smile for approval, and perhaps that is her greatest legacy. In an age obsessed with exposure, Margaret Lockwood proved that mystery can outlast memory. She may have stepped into silence, but the echo of her voice, the glint in her eyes, and the power of her presence remain not just as fragments of an era, but as reminders that sometimes the bravest act of all is to vanish with grace. Fame and shadow, two halves of a single portrait. Margaret Lockwood lived both with rare precision. She knew the warmth of a nation's adoration, the applause that followed her every move, and the power that came from commanding the screen. But she also knew the quiet cruelty of being forgotten, of choosing silence over compromise, and of watching the world move on without her. Her story isn't one of downfall, it's one of authorship. When others tried to write her ending, she took the pen back. In an industry that devoured its brightest lights, she refused to burn for anyone else's pleasure. The woman who vanished at her prime didn't disappear because she was defeated. She disappeared because she understood something few ever do, that the truest form of freedom lies in knowing when to step out of the light. In the end, Margaret Lockwood's legacy is not measured by fame or fortune, but by the elegance of her exit, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful stars are the ones that fade by choice. Which moment of Margaret Lockwood's story stayed with you most, her dazzling rise, her quiet refusal, or her graceful disappearance? If she were still here today, what would you want to tell her, the woman who chose silence over surrender? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let her legacy live again through your words. Like, subscribe, and join us for more untold stories of fame, loss, and the shadows behind the light. Fame and shadows, every star has its story.